So is Jack's. So is every employer. If there's evidence there, let's deal with it. If there's not evidence there, why? Why are we spending so much time? Deputy Mezek only yesterday was castigating the Chief Minister for wasting time when we could be getting on with important things. And yet he'd been offered an amendment here that providing you've got evidence, and we're hearing that there is evidence, well, if there is, fine, bring it forward. And let's just have a realistic time frame. I've had discussions with the chairman of the Health and Social Security panel, recent discussions where we've discussed the 6 months' time that is being asked in the original proposition. He acknowledges that that 6 months is not realistic with the amount of work that needs to be done, and on hearing further evidence of the consultation and the time it would take and the complication of this, it will take more than the 6 months. So why would you then vote for something that gives you to be done in 6 months when we know it's not realistic? Even Deputy Mezek, the proposer of the original amendment, himself says, all right, I kind of get it that you won't get 6 months. The Minister is saying 12 months. With evidence. It does seem to me entirely reasonable and appropriate for the Minister to bring this amendment. It is absolutely correct that evidence, if apparent, and warrants the change in the employment law should be pursued. If there are instances, then this amendment will come into force. So if there is evidence, the original proposer has no need not to accept this amendment, nor does anybody else. All this amendment is saying is, look, if there's evidence, if there's time, we're voting for that. It is, I think, appropriate, fair, realistic, reasonable and right to give the Minister the time to bring this forward, to give law officers time to draft any exclusivity contract, and it is also right to ask for enough evidence to mean that we should do such a thing and change the law. With the lack of evidence and with the lack of time, it would just be a nonsense to move on from this amendment. So I support this amendment, and I hope that other members will do so too.
Teddy.
Thank you, sir. I think there's a reason why it is clearly quite difficult to stop the overlap, and clearly many of the arguments for the amendment will necessarily be ones that might be used in the main debate, and that's because I think essentially what this amendment does is it tries to take the wind out the sails of what is a very simple proposition, and I was pleased that the deputy in front of me, Deputy Bree, I think put his finger on the nub of the problem. If you're in favour of 0 hours contracts, of exclusivity clauses and have no problem with them, or in fact think that they can or should be there because they serve a useful purpose, then you don't need to support this. But if you can't see the evidence, and interestingly, I don't know where the evidence is being put forward for any sensible use of an exclusivity clause. So I think the burden of proof really needs to be the other way round, and there's been no evidence that I've seen presented to us why you would want to have an exclusivity clause in a 0 hours contract. If you did want an exclusivity clause, you have a fixed term contract. If an employer says, I want your loyalty, and in order to do that, fine, give me a fixed term contract and I'll work for you solely, exclusively and loyally, but it has to work both ways. So the burden of evidence actually is the wrong way round. Deputy Mezek doesn't need to provide that sufficient evidence. The evidence for how on earth could an exclusivity clause possibly be of benefit reasonably in most circumstances, that's where the evidence is lacking. Now, I think it's important that all of us, and we do make decisions, and sometimes we say, oh, that group of people are pro-worker, and this group of people are pro-employer, and of course there's going to be an element of that in any assembly. We must remember, of course, that we are the legislature, so it's not simply a case of automatically referring things out to a minister to consultation when actually it's quite simple. We're the ones who have to make political decisions about what's right and wrong, and we are the legislature, and we can decide which laws are good and which laws are necessary. Now, when I talk about being even-handed, it's interesting to remember that the Social Security Minister, I'll say at the drop of a hat, brought a piece of legislation to the Assembly saying that we want to extend the period of unfair dismissal from 6 months to 12 months. She did that, brought it to the Assembly, had a majority, and won it, even though not only was there no evidence for that, but in fact there was evidence and recommendations to the contrary, saying that we didn't need to move it to 12 months because there was no evidence that the 6-month period was insufficient. Yet the minister chose to go with her political instinct, which is fine. I think it might have been one of her election promises, and she moved swiftly to do that and bring it to the Assembly, which is exactly what Deputy Mezek's doing. This is one of his more recent election promises, perhaps even going back. I certainly know he was saying that on the senatorial platform. And you know what? Everybody on that platform was saying, yep, absolutely, exclusivity clauses, quite wrong. 0 hours contracts, we've got to crack down on the abuse, but there's absolutely no reason why we should have exclusivity clauses in a 0 hours contract. And nobody's put that argument forward either. And so I think actually this stalling tactic clearly shows that there's no desire, there's no political desire from the Social Security Minister to tackle this issue. And that's fair enough. You know, she has her own political direction, there's other work. But we as an Assembly need to decide whether or not that's what we feel about this issue. It's quite a simple one. And I think in the interest of being even-handed, by all means, there might be times when we need to make sure that we don't create too much burden and red tape for employers. But in this case, you know, 0 hours contracts, there's nothing in the law to exclude exclusivity clauses. Now, what was interesting, that I thought that when the scrutiny chairman read out that letter, it is quite clear that the intention of that is slightly oppressive towards the worker. So you read that contract, and it's quite clear that, you know, you're working for me, mate, and if you want to go somewhere else, then you have to come and see me. And if I don't like it, then you can't go and work for somebody else. Now, I always thought that the 0 hour contract had to work both ways. That's the whole point of a 0 hours contract. We're told that they work very well for some people. They work for the employer, but similarly, they should also work for the employee. And if there isn't an evenness, a symmetry there, for the person to phone up, say, look, I need you with 1 hour's notice, come and work, that's fine. But similarly, the worker should be able to say, I'm afraid I can't come into work today. In fact, shouldn't need to give a reason for that. And that reason might well be, well, I've got a better job offer. So this week, I've got some piecemeal work on the building site for a week, which is paying me £15 an hour. I'm not going to come in and do this job for 10 hours at £10 an hour. Goes without saying. And these are the real things that, this is the reality on the ground that people like Deputy Mezek are trying to resolve. Now, this idea that you wait until you've got sufficient evidence for something to be a problem before we put it in law is not, I don't think, sensible. I mean, there are lots of things that we have in law, and it's ultimately there to stop bad behaviour. And it may well be that 90% of the working population and bosses are actually not using them, and those on 0 hours contracts are not being used. But we often make laws to defend against the minority who abuse those, and that's common sense. We wouldn't say, oh, there's been no murders in the last 5 years, so let's get rid of the law. It seems completely unnecessary. There's no evidence that murder is a big problem. Okay, there might be the occasional one here and there. But it's too much red tape, isn't it, for citizens to have to worry about this, and we might not have the law drafting time. I know that's, of course, an extreme example, but how much more important in some ways, or how much more important when it comes to work legislation, because we know that people do have to work, and that we know that 0 hours contracts are on the rise. And I see this as very much being both preemptive and forward-thinking, because we know that we have a high prevalence of 0 hours contract. Just under half of the jobs that were recently created are 0 hours contracts. And those on 0 hours contracts, by and large, don't tend to have the same level playing field of power. You know, they might be often lower paid. They might not necessarily be speaking English as their first language. And they might be in a precarious living situation where They don't know where their next job is coming from or where their next wage packet is going to come in and how much that will be. So I think the request here is that we simply put something in the law so we actually know what can and cannot go into a contract. I mean, it seems sensible that we do that. We already do that with the contracts for standard work. We do that in housing, don't we? We say this is what you must put in a contract. This is what you are not allowed to put in a contract. And that's simply what we need to do here to provide clarity for everybody. You must have this in the contract, but you mustn't have a clause which says you must only work for us. And the precedents have been set. You know, the UK did this in May 2015, and that wasn't a radical government that did it. That was a Conservative government which saw that it was an issue, even though they've got a lower prevalence of 0 hours contracts. They said, yes, it's absolutely right that we do this, we'll put it in there. So at least we've got something to work from, and it may well be that that needs to be tweaked, but by and large, you know, we don't need to reinvent the wheel on this. So I think it's unfortunate that the Minister's making heavy weather of this. By all means, let's proceed to the main debate. And in fact, she's put a triple lock in it. So when Deputy Norton stood up, Deputy Norton stood up and said, well, she's just asking for evidence. No, the actual term is sufficient evidence. And as the chairman of the scrutiny panel said, that's a very subjective term because some members, you can give them all the evidence they want, but if they don't believe something, you know, then it will never be sufficient or good enough evidence that there's a problem out there. So essentially what we've got here is a triple lock. It's saying, well, first of all, let's consult on it, then let's put it to the Employment Forum. And when the Employment Forum has capacity, do they have capacity? We don't know whether they do. Is there going to be an offer of capacity from the Social Security Minister or from ministers to that forum to help them do the work? We don't know that. It's unlikely. And then we have the sufficient evidence presented. And, of course, when there's law drafting time that's available. I mean, we don't put that clause into any other request. We don't say, oh, yes, we'll do this when there's law drafting time available. I mean, that goes without saying, doesn't it? It gets added to the queue. And then when it's been drafted, it comes back. So it seems that there are so many unnecessary hurdles that the Minister's putting up here to make this, to really blunt this proposition. So I don't think we should be supporting it at all. Let's go to the main debate. Let's have a good debate. But let's bring our law up to date, moreover. We have lots of, you know, arguably protection for employers, but we have very little legislation in place and protection for some of our most vulnerable workers out there, and that cannot be right.
Any other member wish to speak? Deputy Musson.
Thank you, sir. Listening to this debate, it just feels that I think both sides really need to listen to each other a little bit more. It seems that neither what Deputy Sam Mezek, Deputy Mezek is trying to achieve or what the Minister is proposing really seems to fit to what either side really wants to achieve. And I mean, the Deputy of St Wons gave a really, really good speech to actually stress the evidence which the Minister wants in order to justify the amendment actually might be incredibly difficult to find for some very understandable reasons. On the other hand, the Minister is coming back and saying, actually, this might actually open up quite a big can of worms, which might lead to quite a few technical issues, which causes, you know, knock-on effects to other things that the Minister wants to achieve. It seems a bit unfortunate that perhaps, you know, there wasn't a lot more discussion between the two parties in which, you know, a better solution could have been arrived at. Because I don't want to be one of those members that says, I couldn't possibly vote for this, I couldn't possibly vote for that, and throw it all out. Because I do try to be a member with a can-do attitude, because at the end of the day, what I'm concerned about is what's best for the ordinary people of this community. And I don't want to go as far as perhaps referring this to the Minister, because I know how frustrating that can be for a backbench member. But I do accept that there might be some unintended consequences around the issue of perhaps what could be done, because I know in previous contracts that I've had, there have been clauses, for example, in that you can't work in the same field for the next 5 years, depending where you've been with a certain employer. So if you are, it depends how it's going to be structured and how it's going to be done under the employment law. And it's very difficult for me as a member looking at this, and I look forward to the Minister summing up, because, you know, we do have an employers' market at the moment, with still recovering from the financial crisis, despite the figures that we might hear about 2% growth here or there. It's still that situation. And I agree with the Deputy St Ones, 12% of our working population being on 12 hours contracts, that's nothing to be held up as a good thing in this day and age. So neither option that has been presented to me really seems to be quite the right way forward. And I think perhaps maybe more discussion about the exact wording of how to go forward to produce the better things for our island community might be a more sensible approach than trying to have this us and them attitude which seems to be present at the moment. And I know it's very difficult when you're a backbench member and you want to try and push something forward because you feel really passionate about an issue. But at the same time, perhaps on the ministerial side, when you do have an army of civil servants, perhaps a bit more help could have been offered, given at the same time, when I all know we're all incredibly busy members. So at the moment, and we'll wait for the Minister to start up, and of course I'll listen to Deputy Mesic when we move on. But I appreciate that neither solution quite seems to be quite right with what we're being asked to vote on. And I just ask perhaps another way forward can be presented to us. Thank you, sir.
Deputy St Mary.
Thank you, sir. I can identify with much of what the previous speaker said. I think when I came into the Assembly this morning, I was inclined to vote in favour of the proposition as originally was, rather than the amendment. I think perhaps the most meaningful contribution made this morning, to my mind, is that from the Attorney General. He has pointed out that the term exclusivity clause has not been identified, and that needs to be identified before we can put legislation forward. So to what the Minister says and the proposer says, my inclination at present, therefore, is to go with the amendment to allow more time to consider that aspect in particular. Thank you, sir.
Conor Thompson.
Thank you, sir. Indeed, Deputy Massel's speech was quite refreshing after some of the more morbid ones we've had this morning on this issue. But I do agree with what Deputy Taddia said. We are really making very heavy weather of this about something which really, basically, when it comes down to it, we all agree. We all agree that exclusivity clauses in zero-hours contracts are not only inappropriate, they're basically wrong. But we hear from the Minister that the issue is not really a problem at the present time. And I had a meeting, actually, with my constable colleagues, with the Chief Officer of the Jersey Advisory and Conciliation Service, who confirmed that it is not an issue. And they're the people who ought to know, as Deputy Norton said a few moments ago. I think the difficulty, as I understand it, that the Minister has for bringing the amendment and not accepting the proposition as it is basically administrative. Because if this were adopted as it is, if the proposition was adopted as it is, then other important work, where there really are issues and problems, would be delayed. And if that happened, then the Minister would be criticised by the very people who are bringing this proposition, quite rightly, for not bringing it. Now, sir, this isn't a matter of amending a law, as we've heard. It's actually a matter of creating a new one. So, irrespective of all the amount of consultation that would have to be done and everything else, it certainly would take a long time for this to come into effect, and would, as I said before, and as the Minister has said, would delay other important work. Now, if the Minister, I mean, this is probably being far too hopeful, if the Minister would withdraw her amendment, and Deputy Mesic would withdraw Part B of his proposition, then we could all agree that exclusivity clauses in zero-hours contracts should be prohibited. And then the Minister would have a direction from this Assembly to bring in the appropriate law in the appropriate timescale. Or indeed, Deputy Mesic could just withdraw the time limit in his Part B, because we all agree that it is wrong. If they exist, they're wrong. But let's, we really are making very heavy weather of this, and if If something like that could be done, we can all agree unanimously that they be prohibited. What we can't agree, what we won't be able to establish, is what the timescale should be.
Senator Ferguson.
Yes, I agree with both the previous speakers. Although I would put the problem further back in the development stage, because the problem to be solved is why are there so many zero-hour contracts and zero-hour contracts that are exclusive? You know, is it perhaps because the employment laws need to be reviewed?
That is off the subject, Senator.
No, the reason, sir. It isn't actually, with respect.
Well, tell me why it's on the subject. On the face of it, we're talking about the amendment at the moment.
Well, we are discussing the minister's amendment to delay things. We're discussing the deputy's proposition to rule them out of court, and basically they're both talking about the symptoms and not about the cause.
Senator, I think we're talking about a question of process, which is what the amendment is about. To the extent that you need to talk about the substance and talking about the process, of course you may do so, but we are talking about the process.
Yes, well, I think, really, sir, if we're going to alter the process, I don't agree with exclusive contracts because effectively they take us back 200 years to the old hiring fairs, or in rather less time, to the docks. And on that basis, I agree totally with the proposition. But any amendments to the zero hours contracts have got to be fair and balanced. And if you're going to be fair and balanced, you've got to look at both sides. So that, in effect, I think, you know, we should put it back into the realms of discussion. And as the previous speaker has said, the minister and the deputy should perhaps have more meaningful discussions. And I'm not sure which way I'm going to vote on it.
Deputy Sutherland.
Thank you, sir. And before I refer directly to the amendment, I just want to wait for a minute with the vision I have of the Deputy for St. One as an impatient bullock, whose steam coming from his nose, his nostrils, waiting to get out of the field. Here is the most patient of men. He has me as his vice chairman. He must be patient.
I don't hope I didn't mislead the Assembly. I was referring to Deputy Mezek as the impatient bullock.
That's more understandable. The young bullock on my left. Perhaps. Yes. But the fact that he's involved himself in this particular issue is not necessarily straightforwardly as a backbencher. He has picked up on the evidence, limited though it is, the evidence produced by our scrutiny panel. And I can see that we have problems here. Now, the suggestion has just been if the minister would withdraw her amendment, then perhaps we could get onto the main amendment, and perhaps Deputy Mezek might choose to withdraw paragraph B. This comes from the Constable of St. Clement's. I think that is certainly, since we seem to have come to an impasse, that is a way forward. And I would encourage both the Minister and Deputy Mezek to consider that as a way forward. Having said that, that would mean that the work that needs to be done would be done. We would be accepting in principle that exclusivity clauses in zero-hours contracts should be prohibited, in principle. Somebody is going to have to get the weight. It takes out the 6 months, which we're told is one of the problems, the time-limited nature of it, and it enables the minister appropriately to work on that as she saw fit. Now, we can keep her feet to the fire quite readily as we go through time. It won't drift off into the mist of time because the impatient bullock on my left will make sure that something happens in a reasonable time, I'm sure. But the answer is, the amendment actually is one which says to the impatient bullock, we're not leaving the paddock, full stop. Because what it actually asks is impossible. We need sufficient evidence that exclusivity clauses are being misused in zero-hours contracts in Jersey. Well, the fact is, turn the page, and what we get is there is no legislation that says there's a misuse at all. Because the work needs to be done, definition of a zero-hours contract. In our employment law, we have no definition of zero-hours contract. Full stop. Definition of an exclusivity clause. So we've seen that it's not that difficult because the UK have done it in a fairly, in my understanding, a fairly concise way and would catch the example that we got for Gigabit Field Force operating 18 months ago, which was under UK law, would have been not enforceable. So it's not that hard to do. We just need to start doing it. And then we've got the circumstances in which zero-hour contracts are not permitted to be exclusive and those in which it might be exclusive. So we've got some work to do, but not enormous amounts of work, I would have thought, given that we have examples only across the way. But to attempt the impossible by proving that which is not illegal, that there's no definition of misuse, I would argue that having an exclusivity clause in a zero-hours contract is intrinsically, automatically a misuse, because it does, as my colleague on my left say, alter the balance between the employer and the employee, and that balance has to be maintained. It must be free to take hours or to offer hours as people see fit. That's why it's 0 hours. But the evidence is there that we have some of this misuse amongst a growing number of 0 hours contracts, something of the order of 12,000, a significant portion of our workforce. If one looks at the scrutiny report on which this is based, we find the employee survey, are you allowed to work for another employer under the terms of your 0 hours contract? Yes, always, about 35%. Yes, sometimes, about 19%, 1 in 5. No, never, around 17, 18%. So employees say it's happening. Employers, under the terms of your 0 hour contract, are your employees allowed to work for another company? Almost 80% say yes, always, but 20% say yes, sometimes. Some of those times, they're not. And that means that the exclusivity clauses are being used. Employers are saying sometimes. Employees are saying significantly more than the employers, but they're definitely being used. That's their understanding. So the evidence is there that this is something that needs to be done. There are any number of ways in which 0 hours contracts can be used inappropriately. One of those inappropriate uses is to tag an exclusivity clause onto it and alter the balance so that the employee doesn't have the same freedom as the employer to offer or take work. That's the reality. And whilst the Minister has produced her own set of quotes from various bodies, I just want to remind where we started from. And the Minister of Social Security herself, back when we did this in June or July this year, Minister of Social Security said, I would not agree that there should be exclusivity. Full stop. Nice and short. Chief Executive of Jersey Chamber of Commerce, I think in answer to your question, Deputy, we find it very difficult to justify or even support an exclusive 0 hours contract. I cannot think of a reason why one would think that it would be acceptable. So in answer to your question, should we replicate UK legislation? I cannot think of a reason why we would not at the moment. They seem to be the ones that cause most public and moral outrage, and I understand why. That's from the Chamber of Commerce. And from the President, they have been made illegal in the UK, and I would 100% agree with that. That goes right against the fair concept of the 0 hours contract, and if you have a 0 hours contract, there should be no exclusivity contract in it. And Prospect the Union, who also made a submission, said the following: our position is that we have serious concerns about the use of 0 hours contracts and the impacts on full-time staff. For example, the impact on pension rights and the ability to secure mortgages and loans. We believe use should be proportionate, relevant, and only used when there is clear justification. In addition, contracts must not contain a clause restricting employment, a whole time and attention clause. And this is part of the conversation. A whole time and attention clause is read widely as an exclusivity clause. You should be able to work for other employers. I think the evidence is there. I think with a bit of moderation on both sides, I would encourage the Minister, with Deputy Mezek's cooperation, I would encourage them both to go forward with the principled decision that exclusivity clauses in 0 hours contracts should be prohibited, and get rid of Article B, get rid of the amendments, and agree a way forward.
Minister, Deputy Mezek, until such time as you both reveal your hand, the Assembly is going to continue debating the process that is to be adopted, therefore, as I understood it, the suggestion was that just out of Part B, the words within 6 months should be removed, Deputy, or the whole of Part B. The whole of Part B to be removed if the Minister withdraws her amendment.
From my perspective, I'm happy to move along like that. That to me seems a sensible way forward, and I'd be happy to go with that.
Sir, if I may, sorry, I was just moving between seats in the chamber. If you are asking the mover of the main proposition and the Minister about her amendment, I've just been in conversation with the Solicitor General, and I'd like to ask him a question about whether the result of those two, that proposal which the Constable of St Clement made, which seemed extremely reasonable on the surface, and I was encouraged by that. However, so I'd like to ask the Solicitor General whether he feels that leaving in place an agreement of this Assembly to simply remove exclusivity clauses on 0 hours contracts, saying nothing else at all, might cause unnecessary uncertainty and in itself cause other problems.
Sir, is that not a decision that the Chair can make?
Well, it's always a pleasure to hear from the Solicitor General.
So I would simply, in response to the Chief Minister's question, I would simply say if Part A of Deputy Mezek's proposition is left to proceed on its own without Part B, that does still leave the issue of the definition of what is an exclusivity clause, which I alluded to when asked the question in response to the extract of a contract that the Deputy of St One read out. So potentially we're still left with, whilst it might be a statement of intent as to how the Assembly wishes to proceed, we are still left with the potential uncertainty created by, well, what exactly is an exclusivity clause which is being prohibited? And it could lead to uncertainty amongst both employers and employees as to whether their contract is prohibited or not. So I simply raise that. I simply raise that as a potential concern if the Assembly proceeds down this route, sir.
So just a question for the Chair, following on from what the Attorney General said. It's presumably the case that both A and B are in order, that they've been passed, and that similarly it's always been possible for one part to succeed and one part to fail. So I don't think B follows from A, so it would be entirely possible for A to get through and B to fail, and therefore for an in-principle decision to be made, and that doesn't impinge on any future work that needs to be done defining exclusivity clauses, which is incidentally in inverted commas there. So I would have thought that is a political decision to be made by the Assembly, and then any future work would need to be subject to the Assembly and the Minister holding her to account.
As a matter of process, I agree with that. So, Minister, you've heard from Deputy Mezek. As and when you're able to help us in relation to this matter, no doubt you will. And in the meantime, if you're not, then the debate will continue.
So I guess the public are very confused, as are the Assembly, about all of this. We have agreed totally in principle that exclusivity clauses are not an option. I spoke to the Deputy yesterday. So in principle, it's just the wording of the proposition that is very difficult for the department to follow through, because as the Solicitor General has given his advice, what is an exclusivity clause? And in Part A of the proposition, the word prohibited is difficult because in some cases it's essential. If you're looking at a bank, for instance, where you don't want somebody moving to another bank with their clients, or there are simply some situations where these clauses are necessary. However, I thank everybody who's spoken on this, and the main thrust of our amendment was not disagreeing with the principle. It was the matter of time.
Minister, I'm not asking you to make another speech. You have opportunity to sum up later on. I'm just asking you whether, in the light of what's been said, you wish to withdraw the amendment. If you don't, we'll continue with the debate.
So if the Deputy Mezek withdraws Part B of his proposition, I'm happy to withdraw the amendment, but I do wish to express my concern about the prohibitive part of A, Part A.
The withdrawal of the amendment at this stage needs the leave of the Assembly. If that is a proposition, before we go on to ask anybody else to speak, then please make it. Do you seek leave of the Assembly to withdraw the amendment?
Yes, sir, on the condition that...
On the condition as made plain, yes. Well, that's seconded? Nobody wishes to speak, I take it. Those in favour of adopting that proposition...
I think we could have the appel, please.
The appel is called for. The proposition is whether to give leave to the Minister to withdraw her amendment. And I ask the greffier to give leave to the Minister to withdraw her amendment against the undertaking from Deputy Mezek not to proceed with Part B of his proposition. I ask the greffier to open the voting. If all members have had the opportunity of voting, I ask the greffier to close the voting, and I can announce that that proposition has been adopted. 42 votes in favour, 1 vote against.
Senator McLean voted contra.
Very well. When we return to the main proposition, and it has been proposed and seconded. Does any member wish to speak on the main proposition?
So,
Dean.
I thought it might just be helpful if, as somebody who has an exclusivity deal as part of their terms of engagement, I were to offer a brief comment. The difference is, of course, that I am not on a 0 hours contract or even a Sunday-only contract, as some members might feel. It is just that because it is a full-time, many clergy would say somewhat more than full-time occupation, therefore the exclusivity is there, but so is the full-time stipend. And on the basis of the labourer being worthy of his hire, that seems to me to be an excellent deal, which, as a matter of ethics, exclusivity profoundly contradicts.
Senator Clay.
Thank you, sir. In part, sir, I was going to give an explanation as to why I voted against the withdrawal of the amendment, and that, sir, is quite simply this. The points which I thought were extremely valid raised by the Solicitor General, I know he's been elevated to Attorney General recently. In the views of some members, he's been referred to as Attorney General. He's, of course, the Solicitor General, but thank you for his advice. And that, sir, is about the definition. It does concern me that the proposition as it remains, prohibiting exclusivity clauses within the 0-hour contracts, is potentially, in and of itself, a problem. I think, and I'm sure and have little doubt, that all members here disagree with the misuse of exclusivity contracts, clauses within the 0-hour contracts. But the definition is important. There are cases, as the Minister partly alluded to, where there is a requirement to have conditions within a 0-hour contract protecting areas. For example, you could have someone on a 0-hour contract working at a bank doing a particular function that you don't want going to a competing bank doing the same function at the same time for obvious reasons. So I do feel that, first of all, there is proper use of 0-hour contracts. There is clearly some improper use. I think it's a minority, but nevertheless, it's not acceptable. And I think all members within this Assembly accept the fact that the misuse of 0-hour contracts is wrong. My concern about now accepting Deputy Mezak's amendment, or proposition part A, is that it removes the flexibility that the department would need in looking at the evidence and crafting the way in which, quite appropriately, 0-hour contracts and these types of clauses, the exclusivity clauses, are actually used. So I would just add that in the UK, we are, in this Assembly, often told that we blindly follow UK legislation, and that's a terrible thing. In this case, of course, we're being told we're being very slow and not looking at the good practice and the good moves that have occurred in the UK in terms of dealing with 0-hour contracts, and particularly these exclusivity clauses. However, if we look at the UK, they haven't been 100% successful. The new legislation that they've introduced has actually seen the progression of new arrangements being put in place by employers, such as gig work that's come to the fore, and an increase in self-employment. So there are ways in which employers are finding to get around the changes that the UK have made, which is not good. And there are loopholes in the new legislation that the UK have got. For example, you can hold in the UK as an employer an employee on a 1-hour contract, and as long as he has or she a 1-hour contract per week, then effectively there is no 0-hour contract in place. The UK are clearly aware of this issue, but I'm using it as a point. The matter is complex. It's very technical in terms of employment contract, and I think that was at the very heart, sir, as to why the Minister and the Department of Social Security wanted to take their time and do the job properly, looking at this matter, dealing with areas where there are clearly abuse,
but ensuring at the same time that they protect local businesses that quite appropriately use both zero-hour contracts and appropriate exclusivity clauses within those contracts. And I think that piece of work is right, sir, and that was the reason why I thought the amendment shouldn't have been withdrawn. What I would have liked to have seen happening is both parties withdrawing, and in fact both parties having a discussion. I think we're pretty clear from this debate, it's been a useful debate, insofar as members are now very clear in explaining their concerns about the misuse, and then let the Social Security Department proceed on with the prioritising of the work they're doing. They're doing the very important family-friendly legislation, which needs to continue. The Employment Forum are working hard in that area, and it is important that isn't derailed in any shape or form. So I would just have and hold up a word of caution, sir, about members accepting just Part A in this proposition, which is very clear about prohibiting the use of exclusivity clauses within zero-hour contracts. Until we have a definition, until the work is done, and we look at the appropriate definition of what that actually means, I think it would be wrong to accept Part A. I think it would be very wrong to do that. But I do think the department, and perhaps the Minister can stand and give confidence to members that her department is going to move forward in progressing changes to make sure that abuse is dealt with. And I think that is the appropriate way forward. Thank you, sir.
I wonder if I can just give some guidance from the Chair, just for the avoidance of doubt. Part A, which is Proposition A, which is left, is not a piece of legislation. It's a resolution that exclusivity clauses in zero-hour contracts should be prohibited. And no doubt the debate now focusing on what exclusivity clause might mean or might not mean might be helpful for the Minister and for the proposer in the debate and reaching a conclusion on whether the proposition should be accepted or not. But it's important members recognise it is not a piece of legislation. Deputy St John.
Thank you, sir, and thank you for making that specific point. I'm purely standing here because I'm absolutely dismayed about how this has been handled this morning. I really am, especially after listening to the Treasury Minister just speak, who was the one who came to this Assembly and asked us to agree a waste charge without any information. Don't worry, agree it, and we'll bring back the details later. So it's good for the goose, but not for the gander. I think it's completely wrong. What the Chair has just stated to us is that this is not legislation, that in principle, do we believe exclusivity clauses should be within zero-hour contracts? And I believe that they should not be in zero-hour contracts. And so it bothers me when I hear ministers, on the one hand, turning around saying, we need evidence, prove it to us, show us the evidence, we need to go out and find evidence. But yet when they are provided with evidence, they still don't do anything with it. So, and then we get told there's, we don't have the time, we don't have the money, but that was the point in having a contingency fund. So it doesn't matter what you try and put in place to assist everyone to work together as a team, because clearly we're not, because we have ministerial government, it just gets pushed in your face. It's important that people just stand up and just say, look, I don't agree with what Deputy Mezek's saying. I think there should be exclusivity clauses. I think that this, because these reasons, not make some haphazard argument as to why this Assembly can't send the message out to the public of Jersey that we believe this is not the right thing to do. And it is important for all of us to go and sit down and speak with the Minister for Social Security, or even have another briefing, or even have another workshop, and to explain what we mean by exclusivity, why it isn't right, how it should or shouldn't work. That is important. But what we're being asked here now is whether we believe that should be in the zero-hour contracts. And so I support that. So I can now, it's like one of those light bulb moments, when when all of a sudden it's, wow, I now know why the public see us in the way that they do. I just don't have the words for it, sir.
Speechless.
We all talk about working together. We all talk about listening to each other, but we're not really doing it, and it's really sad. So on that basis, Deputy Mezek, I support you. Thank you for bringing this, and I thank the Minister and Deputy Mezek for agreeing to come to this compromise, and just ask that we get on and vote.
Deputy Master.
Sir, may I just make a clarification, please? It's just on the previous speaker, sir. I just wanted to make it absolutely clear, to clarify that in my earlier speech, I wasn't giving the impression that I agreed with or approved of exclusivity contracts. What I was simply saying was that there is a definition matter. We need to understand the definition of what an exclusivity contract is, and by accepting this proposition, that means we're prohibiting all exclusivity clauses within zero-hour contracts.
Deputy Master.
Thank you, sir. And just on the amendment that have now, I think I can allay a few members' concerns, because if we do adopt this, it allows the Minister to go through the normal legislative process, to go through a green paper stage. Remember what they were? Remember what a white paper stage is. And so if there are concerns out in the community that perhaps, you know, the wording of legislation needs to be done in a certain way, and perhaps with some very niche examples, there might need to be a bit of flexibility around this. I don't see any member of this Assembly finding that unreasonable. So I think some members are trying to say that, you know, there's going to be a mass panic out there in the community if we adopt this. Well, actually, it's not legislation. We're just taking a principled decision, and that the Minister is going to be asked to go away and go through the normal legislative process, and if there need to be some exemptions, then the Minister will come forward with that evidence. And I think, being reasonable members within this Assembly, if that can be produced, that's the way we'll proceed. So I don't quite buy into the kind of the mass concern and hysteria that might be there, because if we go through those normal processes, I think it will be dealt with quite reasonably. And again, I hope that we can move on and vote with this, and it'll be a good day for all of us. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Sullivan.
Yes, sir. Whilst accepting this acceptance in principle is a way forward, but entails a good deal of work, which I would expect more or less to be done. It would be reasonable to expect it to be done in the next 18 months before we all change places or whatever, or return to our whatever. I don't know where that was going, really. The work does need to be done. The fact is, we haven't even got a definition of zero-hours contract in the employment law. Until we do, the employment law cannot be made to properly protect those workers. Equally, we haven't got a definition of an exclusivity clause, nor circumstances when they should be not permitted. That's the reality. That work needs to be done. It needs to be done over a reasonable length of time in order that we should improve the protection for our workers. And remember that this is, as Deputy Mezek said, this was the low-hanging fruit. This was obvious. This is something that nobody actually would support. There are other mechanisms by which zero-hours contracts are being abused. The reason why we got very little evidence of abuse of exclusivity clauses is because if you go and challenge that in your zero-hours contract, your hours could be zero tomorrow, is the reality. So the workers don't challenge because they know very well they could be reduced to zero and not have a job tomorrow because they've got no protection. That protection needs improving. This is the first step, one of several, I would suggest, which also come out of the work we did in the last 6 months ago.
Thank you, sir. And I will be brief because I've agreed with what most of the previous speakers since you made your clarification of what we're doing. all I would say is, I don't think there's a single person in this House who could justify exclusivity clauses, except with the one exception, I think, where Senator McLean mentioned, where there's trade secrets or there's information which is really highly prejudicial if it went to another similar employer. However, the point is, we should be making a stand on this, and we should make it quite clear to the public. There's no legislation. We're asking the Minister to go away, and I hope not 18 months. I would hope within 12 months, or even less than that, she can come back, and come back with some legislation to deal with the abuses that are there. And what I would say is that let the state let's get to a vote on this. We've made heavy weather of the thing, and let's come round and say we condemn this type of contract, and we want to see some change. And let's leave it at that. So I would hope that we can bring this to a conclusion very shortly. Thank you.
Senator Farmer?
Well, sir, no, I think my points were answered. I was going to just ask for clarification on the definition following Deputy Masson's helpful speech. So I believe that can all be thrashed out in the process to follow.
Thank you. Deputy St. Warren?
Thank you, sir. I too believe we really are making heavy weather over these issues about definition. We conducted a scrutiny review over several months. We spoke to the Minister, we spoke to several employee and employer representatives. No one ever said to us there's a big area of doubt over what exclusivity means. The Minister didn't raise the issues that she's now raising today. It seemed to me that we all knew, by instinct almost, that exclusivity clauses means that it was a clause preventing a zero-hour worker from seeking work from any other employer. And everyone understood it that way. And we had documentation from the House of Commons, not just the legislation, but its briefing papers, its advice to MPs. There's other material because in the Republic of Ireland and New Zealand, they've similarly banned exclusivity clauses. So all that is out there. And haven't we got an excellent law drafting team in this island that has put together world-leading legislation identifying what a trust is, our trust Jersey law, and regulating financial services as world leaders, which other jurisdictions have been pleased to copy. So if this is capable of being done, and I don't believe that's going to prevent too much difficulty. And the examples that are being put out over, oh, well, sometimes you might need an exclusivity clause because somebody working at a high level in an organization might hold confidential information and therefore can't go and share it with another employer. That's not about exclusivity. That's about competition. And that sort of difficulty would be caught and put in a contract with an anti-competition clause. Because what you're doing is you're seeking to prevent damage to the commercial interests of the employer. That's nothing to do with exclusivity, because that high-level employee with that confidential information should be able, if he wants to go and work stacking shelves in the supermarket on a Saturday. And that's what an exclusivity clause would prevent him or her from doing if that exclusivity clause was there. So we should not confuse the two. I think there are very few instances where an exclusivity clause might need to be still allowed. But let's work on that. This is what the proposition now means, that we agree a prohibition. I don't understand why the Minister is concerned about the word prohibition. The English legislation uses the word banned. The exclusivity clauses are banned. But now let's go ahead and do the work. And I likewise congratulate and thank the Minister and Deputy Mezek for coming to this point where we can agree a way forward. And I hope members will support the proposition as amended. Thank you, sir.
Chief Minister.
Thank you, sir. Jobs, 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 I was quoted as saying a number of years ago, sir. And this Minister has carried on the work that I started, the subsequent Minister encouraged, and she has done exactly the same.
And jobs is about work, sir. And this government, contrary to what the mover of the main proposition and his colleagues might say, has spent millions of pounds in getting people into work and helping work with employers to create jobs. Because we know, sir, the independent evidence says that work is good for us. And it is not fair to criticise this minister or to criticise her excellent staff who advise on employment law, her excellent staff who day in, day out get hundreds of islanders into work. They are doing a first-class job and they should be supported. I see frowns, sir, on some members. Hundreds of people, through the work and the effort of this minister's department, have jobs today that they didn't have last year, 6 months ago, a month ago. And she is to be congratulated, and so is her department, sir. But we in this assembly, and she recognises that they've got to be good jobs. They've got to be reasonable jobs. And we want employers to act fairly and appropriately within the law. And she, again, has put thousands of pounds into JACS to support employers, to make sure that employers know how they should be treating employees, be that from the issuing of contracts, be that from the entitlement to holiday pay, be that to maternity issues. There is support there. This minister is on record, and this government is on record as saying that it seems to us that exclusivity clauses in zero-hours contracts are not appropriate. How can they be? Because we want to see people in work. There are reasons why zero-hours contracts are appropriate, because they match employers' needs with employees' needs. And that's what they should be used for. But they shouldn't be used as an excuse by an employer to avoid their obligations under the employment law. And some employees actually are doing that without realising that the law still catches them because of the work that the department has done. And members, sir, have said today that the department has done nothing with employment law. I think the mover of this proposition, I see him still nodding his head to that statement, sir, despite the fact that that statement is not a correct analysis of the work that the department have done, because they have made adjustments to the 8-hour rule so that 0 hours contracts were covered. That is an improvement in the benefits available to islanders who are on 0 hours contracts. They've put the extra money into JACS as well to support employers and employees who find themselves on such contracts, to ensure that both know what their obligations, their rights and their responsibilities are. But if in matching the employer's requirements with the employee's needs, that should be done in a fair, in an open approach that gives benefits to both employee and employer. And I think every member would recognise it's quite difficult to see where the benefit to the employee is if they have a contract that doesn't guarantee any work any day of the week, and yet at the same time they are not allowed to seek work elsewhere. That would not be and is not aligned with this government's policy. And the minister has also criticised, sir, for people on income support, encouraging them, supporting them to get extra work. So the proposition, I see you frowning, sir, so you think I'm going off track slightly, but it is a basic reason why the intention that 0 hours contracts should not have exclusivity clauses is perfectly aligned with the work that this minister, her department and this government absolutely support, because we want as many people who are fit and able to work for as long as they possibly can. It's good for Jersey, it's good for the economy, it's good for the individual, and it's good for the individual's family, sir. So don't let the mover of this proposition criticise falsely the Minister, because that's not fair when we see all the work that she is undertaking. But as the Solicitor General said, sir, you look at the description of what exclusivity means and what bits of a contract it might capture, and that will be important. It's not quite as straightforward as my own deputy tried to suggest. I know why he suggested that, because he's a great supporter in seeing this change. But there is a complexity there that needs to be dealt with, that needs to be understood and needs to be drafted appropriately. And I know that the Minister, along with all the other workload that she has got in her department in making people's lives better in the work environment, will go away, and her staff will now take the intention of this Assembly and carry out the necessary work and bring forward any necessary changes to this Assembly in due course, following the appropriate process. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Norton.
Thank you, sir. It's a pleasure to follow the Chief Minister. I didn't quite hear him.
Taken over from Deputy Laherty, actually.
Yes. Indeed, sir. Indeed. The point I wish to make has already been made, so I will be extremely brief. Definition of exclusivity definitely needs to be moved forward, as has been said by many, and a definition of zero-hour contracts needs to be defined as well. And we need that sooner rather than later, for everybody's sake, I think. It has been mentioned there may be some examples of zero-hour contract where exclusivity would be necessary. I tend to agree with the Deputy of St. One that there are other ways in contracts around that, and I agree with my colleague to my right here, Deputy Bree, in a conversation that we had, that if it doesn't fit in a zero-hour contract for exclusivity, well, offer them a different contract, variable hour contracts, part-time contracts, fixed-term contracts. There are many other contracts available other than this one. And if it meant, via exclusivity being prohibited, that zero-hour contracts were reduced because of this, then so be it. Because I think that wouldn't be a bad thing either. I support Part A, and I will be supporting Deputy Messick in this.
Deputy Tadhue.
Thanks, sir. I'm pleased to follow that my St. Brillard colleague, because I think he put it well. I don't think anybody's come up with an example of where exclusivity clauses in 0 hours contracts can be justified. And of course, my notes say, well, if it's that important, even on a 0 hours contract, of course you can be doing very highly paid, highly skilled jobs on a 0 hours contract. You simply have a non-disclosure agreement, confidentiality clause as the standard, so that you might be working in parallel, and of course you keep the information secret and act professionally, and of course one would that's not being prevented here. And so of course we all know what exclusivity clauses mean in the literal sense. We know the lexicographical definition, if that's the word. We know the dictionary definition of what it means. But of course, we do need to put it into law. There's no legal definition because it's not in the law, and we do need to have legislation that covers 0 hours contracts. And it's probably worth saying now, and the Chief Minister, I think, took the opportunity perhaps to make it slightly more partisan when we were enjoying a nice moment of calm bipartisanship in the Assembly. But of course, we don't want that to last too long. Because I think the comments more generally about where work legislation sits does need to be addressed. There are still certain things that Jersey workers don't enjoy that counterparts in the UK or in Europe do enjoy. And so this is just one of those things that we're trying to rectify. Another example, of course, is the Working Time Directive. What is the maximum period of time that we think is acceptable for people to work, whether that be as a nurse, a doctor, or as a waitress or elsewhere? And what's the minimum break periods that they should have, either for lunch, for tea breaks, but also between shifts? I know certainly in some care homes in the island, and sorry to go off piece, sir, but it's just to contextualise slightly in the context of work legislation and the fact that there is more work to do, and we must always be on the ball. I know certain carers who do amazing work, in this example, in residential care for the elderly, who tell me, well, what time are you ticking off tonight at midnight, and then I've got to come back at 8 o'clock in the morning, you know? And these are not uncommon practices, and that may or may not be combined with 0 hours contracts. And so I'd find it very difficult, especially in those jobs which are so physical and so demanding and also so valuable socially to all of us, and that you might have people getting home with perhaps 6 hours sleep, if that, and then getting ready to work and not necessarily being their best in the morning. So we do need to look at work legislation across the piece. And perhaps one of my concerns is that do we give enough resourcing to our law drafting team? Because we often hear, oh, you know, this is going to take such a period of time to bring this back, especially when it's something that we seem to unanimously agree is correct to do. And we know that there is different prioritisation that is given to law drafting. And it seems to me that in this instance, the practical thing to do, even though consultation is good, when it's something which is so obvious and that nobody can really disagree with, do we really need to spend money and resources on a lengthy consultation period, perhaps asking the tribunal, not the tribunal, but JACS to do this work, whereas actually it might be better seconding somebody, say Social Security, saying, well, there's a bit of money for law drafting purposes, and we would like you to bring someone in specifically to draft this piece of legislation which relates to that, and it might be a much more cost-effective and quick way of doing that. I just put that on the table. It may be politically naive to suggest that, but it might actually be completely viable and save all of us money in the long run and speed things up. Because it's important, I think, that in Jersey we do have a well-resourced law drafting team. But I think the reason that when the Chief Minister stood up and says, of course, we need good jobs, I'm glad that he's put that on record, because that's not always been the message that's come forward from the Council of Ministers more generally. Because we've had the Economic Development Minister standing up saying that all jobs are good jobs, and that's on Hansard. He said that I believe that all jobs are good jobs, and that was in response to a question on 0 hours contracts and precarious working practices. That's clearly not the case. Not all jobs are good jobs, and they're certainly, when they have an exclusivity clause in them, that's not a good job. So I'm glad that the Chief Minister at least has put on record that he wants to see good jobs being created, whether they're 0 hour or not. And we've also had comments, of course, that when the tide comes in, all boats rise from the Treasury Minister. And that's not the case either, is it? We know that, in fact, in Jersey, the tide comes in and many boats, if they've got a hole in them, actually end up sinking and struggling to keep their holes above water. So I think just to put that in context, but I think we're all united here today in wanting to see something being done that's positive. But we must guard against the fact that we make an in-principle decision, great, but we need to hold the Minister's feet to the fire, because she is the only one who can bring new legislation back to the Assembly, no one else. And we need to make sure that's done in a timely manner, of course, appreciating the fact that it may take some time.
Deputy Truscott.
Thank you, sir. I think it was British Telecom that said it pays to talk. And I think if there is any kind of criticism, and it is just, this is to everybody really, it's this: if Deputy Mazek had come to the department, we would have probably avoided this whole debate today, because we were up for the amendment, for the proposition. So I'm the Assistant Minister for Social Security. Now, it's just often we have this conversation, and I was very, very kindly, I was handed the political responsibility for the Back to Work initiative at the department. And I've really going to take this opportunity, one, to sing their praises, because I've got 70 staff that daily work with the unemployed, talking to employers, and doing a fantastic job. I mean, in a year, they put in over 2,000 job placements. They're driving down unemployment. They're doing a most magnificent job. And the one thing I would like to say is that we were seeking evidence, and quite rightly too, in so much as that we have not laid sight on one contract, physical contract. This has all been hearsay. It would have been just nice to see some physical evidence rather than anecdotal or whatever. But And I've also got to say that one of the overarching aims of Social Security is to enable people to gain financial independence and maintain it. And if we'd have detected at any time any mechanism being used by an employer that would actually stop people gaining financial dependence, then we would have put a stop to it straight away, sir. I've got the 70 staff daily talking to employers. At not one point did we ever come across the pushback. Sorry, I'll start this again. Currently, we've got 400 individuals that are basically underemployed. Now, we are constantly onto them, encouraging them to get more work, but not one time did we get the pushback to say that, well, actually, I'm on an exclusivity contract. I can't go out and find work. Not one. Now, that's 400 people. There was no evidence whatsoever. I'll let the Minister sum up. I'm pleased we've got to this situation today. Thank you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak? Mr. President.
Thank you, sir. Sometimes there are moods which are unshakable in terms of being affecting our island. We spoke earlier, and your own remarks about the conversations that we were having yesterday about the bailiff's position. So there is a global movement going on around the world about effectively globalization, jobs, and the problems of politicians. And this is directly linked to this debate, which is why I will support the amended withdrawn proposition. But I want to also reinforce the fact that the solution to economic growth is not to turn away from globalization, from economic liberalism. It is effectively to make it harder. And I refer members, if I may, to the speech of the United Kingdom Prime Minister at the Mansion House, where she said, liberalism and globalization have delivered unprecedented levels of wealth and opportunity. They have lifted millions out of poverty. They have brought nations closer together, broken down barriers, and improved the standard of living and consumer choice. And they are underpinned by the rules-based international system that global prosperity and security, which we must protect. She also said, these people often are those, she referred to people on modest to low incomes, living in rich countries like her own, the United Kingdom, that see their jobs being outsourced, and at the heart of this debate, and why we're having it, is where wages can be undercut. They see their community, she said, changing around them, and they don't remember agreeing to that change. And she said in conclusion, sir, and this is directly relevant to the dilemma that this assembly, but other assemblies and democracies around the world are facing, is that she said she believes in liberalism and globalization must continue to offer the best future for our world, and we must deliver, we must deal with the downsides and show that we can make the twin forces work for everybody. Because when you refuse to accept that globalization in its current form has left too many people behind, you are not sowing the seeds for its growth, but for its ruins. And she said, finally, that the true mark of leadership is not standing inflexibly, refusing to change, but still fighting the battles of the past, which I somehow think the left-wing agenda sometimes does, trying to battle from the past, but adapting to the moment, evolving thinking, and seizing the opportunities ahead. And that's what we should be doing. I am not against rules, and I am not against what we now have is that effectively exclusivity clauses should be prohibited. But at the same time, we must not send out the message that effectively onerous government regulation on and not having flexible job markets is the solution to providing opportunity and incomes for our island community. We have to put protections in place. We have to be thoughtful, but we cannot basically turn ourselves against the forces of the rest of the world and say that there isn't issues of competition and innovation and needing to compete. And Reform can look at me with size. They can say they don't like economic liberalism. They can say all the things that they want. And they clearly remonstrating, sir. Cameras only look at me, sir, when I'm talking, and I'm talking, sir, and I'm not giving way.
No, okay.
So I suspect Deputy Sutherland wanted to raise a point of order, which is to do with relevance, which I'm happy to raise as well.
If it's a point of order, sir.
I think what was being put to you, Senator, was that you were diverting from what the purpose of the proposition is, and perhaps you could come back to it.
Yeah, so the purpose of the proposition is to send out a message, is that we are pro-growth, we are economically liberal, that we will understand what the real concerns are, which are the heart of this, which is effectively there have been too many people who do not feel as though they are being part and being beneficiaries of the world of globalisation. And you are seeing that around the world, in the debate in Brexit, the Trump election, etc. People have come to the ballot box and they have said, we are not part of it. We are not part of this growing growth in terms of prosperity. And so this is absolutely relevant to this debate, and it's relevant to the context in which we are approving this. Yes, we are going to approve a 0-hour prohibition. Yes, we are going to do exclusivity clauses, but we are not sending out a message where we are going to have unflexible labour markets which are at the centre of effectively creating the jobs and opportunities for our island communities which are competitive. We have to share the proceeds of growth. It is apparently a crime now, not a crime in your court, sir, but it's a crime to say that you are against certain issues of flexible labour markets. It has to be a balance. We've had a debate which reflects that balance. We have to listen to the class of people in Jersey which are really concerned that they don't believe that they have been the beneficiaries of what has been the benefit of an unprecedented amount of growth and prosperity, and that has to be shared. But that's not about transferring and being a Robin Hood and simply taking from the rich and giving the poor. It's, as the former Prime Minister of the UK said, it's not about the gap, about the richer being the poorer less poor. It's by everybody getting back. And this is at the heart of this debate. It's sending the right message out that we are approving this for the right reasons and not simply putting back in place proposals which restrict labour markets. And it is in the spirit of that that I warmly accept this proposition, but not if it's sending out a message that we're simply going to row back the tides of globalisation, economic liberalism and free labour markets and jobs for all.
Thank you, sir. This is the third debate in which we have been pushing very hard at an open door. And effectively, the one thing it has convinced me more than anything else is that perhaps we should all be honorary politicians, because then we'd have jobs to go home and get on with it, instead of spending our time debating away, pontificating, instead of getting down with the real business we need to do. Can we please get on with the vote?
Does any other member wish to speak? If not, Deputy Mezek, do you wish to speak at length? It seems to you have the Assembly with you.
So members will be delighted to know that I'm not going to speak at length. I agree almost entirely with what the Constable of St John just said, that many contributions to this debate have been absolutely superfluous, including the frankly embarrassing grandstanding from Senator Ossoff and the Chief Minister, which I will not be engaging with. This is an open door. We know what's right. We know what's wrong. I call for the appel, sir.
The appel is called for. I invite members to return to their seats. The vote is limited. The vote is limited to Part A of Deputy Mezek's proposition that exclusivity clauses in 0-hour contracts should be prohibited. And I ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have had the opportunity of voting. I ask the greffier to close the voting. Can announce that the proposition has been adopted. 43 votes in favour, no votes against.
Sir, before we adjourn, we have a workshop for States members on the future hospital, and some 20 members have accepted that invitation. Could I open the invitation to those who declined, maybe because they had other appointments that might have changed? Even if you haven't accepted, we'd be very pleased to see you there.
Thank you. Before we adjourn, can I just announce that there are two propositions which have been lodged. The draft Opticians Registration Amendment Number 2 Jersey Law Amendment, lodged by the Minister for Health and Social Services, P120, and an amendment to P110, Future Hospital Preferred Site, lodged by the Constable of St John.
I propose the adjournment, sir.
Adjournment proposed. The court. States now stand adjourned until 2:15.